Hi, have a good day. Today our guest is Aaron Stein. Mr. Stein is a resident fellow at Rafik Hariri Center for the Middle East at the Atlantic Council. And Mr. Stein has recently published a report with Council on Foreign Relations, a US-based think tank, entitled Reconciling US-Turkey Interests in Northern Syria. And in this report, he discusses four possible scenarios for the new US government's Syria policy. And today we will talk with Mr. Stein these different scenarios and what sort of implications they could have for what's going on in Syria. So, hi, Mr. Stein.
Hello, thank you for having me on the show.
Thank you. And in your report, you describe four different scenarios for the US policy in Syria, and I will name them. First one is to escalate support for the Syrian Democratic Forces. Second one, abandon the Kurds in favor of Euphrates Shield operation initiated by Turkey. And the third one, narrow the US mission in Syria and revisit joint air operations with Russia. And the last one is to maintain the status quo, which would mean managing tensions with Turkey and continuing to cooperate with Kurds. So, since you wrote this report, there has been a diplomacy traffic between two countries, like Turkey and the US. The US military chief was in Turkey last week, and he spoke with his Turkish counterpart, and the Turkish military chief proposed plans to take Raqqa and abandoning US's cooperation with Kurds. So, considering these recent developments and the diplomacy traffic between two countries, which of these scenarios seem more likely to you?
The Turkish proposal isn't entirely new. One of the reasons I included scenario number 2, which is basically go all in with Euphrates Shield and then basically abandon the Kurds, is that this has been a proposal that has been dangled from the Turkish side in particular for well over a year now, if not even slightly more than that. And so the chairman Dunford, and then Secretary Mattis, I don't think are hearing anything particularly new. Dunford in particular, Mattis only because he's new into the job. But this will be the defining early foreign policy decision for the Donald Trump administration is, do you go with scenario 1, and which is what the Obama administration was favoring towards the end, which is to give more weapons and heavy weapons to the SDF because the fight for Raqqa will be particularly intense. And I think now, to answer your question, there is still a debate going on about how exactly to do this, but I think what the policy will ultimately settle on is to give more support for Euphrates Shield in the area that it is now, particularly around Al-Bab. Again, that's presuming Turkey lets us. That's a whole other thing. And 2 will be to escalate support for the SDF. There is a wild card, which is U.S. ground forces, that has been floated, that's been around in Washington for a little while. Particularly 3 infantry brigades that would help with the taking of Raqqa. But you still have the problem with Turkey because the hold force would still be the SDF. So you have all these complicated things going on in Syria, and then obviously you have the U.S.-Turkey relations running up against the priorities of the war against the Islamic State that the U.S. is so focused on right now.
And what's your take on John McCain's claim about, because he visited Turkey last week and he said that U.S. and Turkey need to work together to fight against ISIS, and he said that the U.S. should consider Turkey's plan, which you said is not something new. Though, can we see all these developments as U.S. being more inclined to the fourth option, continue its diplomacy with Turkey, but cooperating with Kurds on the ground?
I think it's reflective of the debate that's been going on in Washington for a very long time. Turkey has a lot of friends in Washington. It's not as bad as the Turkish media makes it out to be. And Turkey had a lot of friends in the Obama administration. The big counter push to scenario 1, arming the Kurds more forcefully, was the Obama National Security Council. And so the administration was very much divided about the best way forward. And the military in particular is very fond of the Syrian Kurds. and would have gone with scenario one well over a year ago had it not been for political types inside the Obama White House slowing it down. John McCain, again, is, I think, indicative of that debate, which is still unfolding, which is because there are people who say, look, the Islamic State isn't that big of a deal. You know, Turkey will be an ally long after the Islamic State goes away, and so we have to figure out a way to manage tensions with Turkey.
And you mentioned that the U.S. ground forces can be as like a wild card in what's going on in Northern Syria. Can you elaborate a bit more on this issue, how this is being discussed in Washington?
Well, nobody really wants to do it, but you have a conundrum. You know, if you can't give heavy weapons to the SDF because it may precipitate Turkish moves in Syria that will be detrimental to the taking of Raqqa, i.e. they move on Manbij or they move on Tel Abyad, what do you do? And so how do you break Islamic State defenses around the town without seriously screwing up relations with Turkey? And so one option to do that is heavy U.S. forces, either tanks or infantry or a combination of the both. I don't think that will actually happen, but it will certainly be presented at some level up through the bureaucracy here in the United States. And ultimately what I think the U.S. will settle on is helicopter support for the Syrian Democratic Forces and a decision to arm them with vehicles in particular, armored vehicles. And we saw that towards the end of the Obama administration. But this is the decision that the Trump administration will have to make, and we're coming up on the end of the 30-day review, which was on February 28th. So they have about a week to figure it out.
And in your report, your first and foremost recommendation for the new administration of the U.S. is to encourage a resumption of the PKK-Turkish peace talks that collapsed in July 2015, 2 years ago. And can you explain us this a bit more? Why do you consider this as a crucial step to reconcile U.S. and Turkey interests in Syria?
So I want to caveat by saying that I'm a student of Turkish domestic politics, know how difficult this is. But for me, everything that I've just discussed is tactical. Whatever we decide, even if we go with the Turkish plan, which I don't think the U.S. will do, it's still tactical. In that you have a very long front line between essentially Syrian PKK and Turkish ground forces all along the Turkish border, and then jutting into Syria as far south as Al-Bab. This is inherently destabilizing for Turkey, and it's inherently destabilizing for the future of Syria. And so therefore, what are you going to do about it? Stop focusing on tactics. Taking a city is easy. It's just a matter of putting in enough military hardware to do it. It's tactically straightforward. Strategically, though, what do you do with the city after it falls? And the U.S. is going to hand Raqqa over to the SDF. And then you're going to have very tense relations with Turkey. And so you may be able to mitigate conflict the next year, maybe a couple months. But what's to prevent Turkey invading 2 years from now? Which will cause a lot of problems for U.S. foreign policy as we try and pivot away from Syria. So my solution is to get out in front of this problem and go to what was Turkey's original strategy for Syria. This is a Turkish policy, which is to manage problems in Syria. First and foremost, you try and control the opposition on the Arab side, and on the Kurdish side, you try and take the PKK card away by engaging in peace negotiations. I think the U.S. needs to give Turkey a push.
And I mean, you said that you're familiar with internal domestic politics of Turkey, and I want to ask your opinion about that there's a referendum coming up, and if the result of this referendum is yes, and Turkey turns into a presidential system with the leadership of Recep Tayyip Erdogan, how do you think, under these consequences, do you think the resumption of peace negotiations is viable? Is it possible?
It's extremely difficult. The coalition supporting the AKP and Erdogan's goals at the moment is entirely different than the coalition that was supporting him between 2012 and 2015. And the major causes of the no vote outside of the CHP, but we'll talk about in Saadet and in the rank and file of the MHP, is that he's too soft on terror. That's one, and the other is that this will result in de facto dictatorship. But if you take the too soft on terror, you have a recipe for Erdogan to continue to consolidate his base on the nationalist right. And so that does not bode well for a resumption of the peace talks. And we should not forget that, the original mechanism domestically in Turkish politics, beyond the sort of geopolitical stuff in Syria, was that he needed Kurdish support for his presidential system. If he's able to get his presidential system without Kurdish support, he actually has an incentive to continue to crush the HDP as a political movement. And then he would begin to resurrect a peace process. But would it really be a peace process? Or would it be some, assigned mayors in like Diyarbakir who sit around the table and then talk about peace, but they don't actually represent the main combatant side on the Kurdish side, which is the PKK. And so, no, I'm not very optimistic about this, but it leads me back to the role of Washington. So what are you going to do about this? It's entirely, so my thinking is along the lines of Good Friday, which again was a model for the Turkish government for their own peace process between 2012 and 2015. But that took American intervention in, again, a bloody insurgency, this time in a Western ally, Great Britain, to solve their own problems, at least help solve their own problems, I should say. And so that is the sort of two-pronged approach I take to my recommendation. And it will be difficult. The Turks will kick and scream, and they'll be very upset that the U.S. sticks its nose into domestic politics. But otherwise, the U.S. will simply leave Syria, and we will have a very long front line and tensions that can boil over at any minute.
And how do you think the U.S. can use the like a hypothetical and possible resumption of peace talks between the Turkish state and the PKK to do anything in Syria? How this like internal development in Turkish politics could affect what's going on in Syria?
It should be tied to an effort to freeze front lines, I should say, inside of Syria. So along Euphrates Shield territory and along the border. And so you could get, through de facto ceasefire of the PKK with the AKP, you also get with that the PYD, because they're all the same group. And so you can try and mitigate tensions. Because look, at some point in Syria, the United States and Russia are going to come together and figure out some sort of consensus about how to govern in this. And I'm sad to say that, Turkey is the junior partner to both of these major powers. And so its ability to influence major political, headwinds, I should say, that come from Moscow and Washington will remain limited to Euphrates Shield territory. And so you can envision a scenario where you end up with a decentralized Syrian state, where there is local councils out in Kurdish-controlled territory in the east. And then what does Turkey plan to do with that? And so you have to tie the peace process in Turkey to achievable political end goals inside of Syria. Because right now I don't see anybody having any realistic political end goals in Syria, and that's every country involved. That's Russia, that's the US, that's Turkey.
And you also, one of your recommendations to the US government is that they support this plan, this political project of a decentralized but territorially united future Syrian state. Why did you felt the need to include these two recommendations, US strongly supporting this idea of a decentralized but territorially united Syrian state?
Because that's where I think we're going to end up anyways, and so I think it's best to get out in front of it. And again, the unitary system of government, in the United Kingdom was the model for the 2012-2015 peace talks with the PKK. I tried to incorporate what was already Turkish policy into my recommendations, because we don't have to reinvent the wheel over here. Ankara had a very smart strategy dealing with this aspect of the Syrian civil conflict for 3 years. Domestic politics intervened. The PKK screwed up considerably in July. The AKP screwed up considerably in March, and you now have a pathway to violence that never ends unless you have a political solution. And so I tried to model the political solution on what the AKP was at least telling people quietly was the political solution to the PKK conflict during those 3 years. And
we know that a major actor in this conflict in Syria is Russia. And considering what you propose will be realized, like PKK and Turkey restarting their peace negotiations, and the US using this as a leverage to broke ceasefires in Syria, how do you think Russia, the other like big power, would respond to all these developments?
Well, Russia has played both sides of this conflict, and so they are giving support to Turkey's Al-Bab operation. I would use support very loosely, and their bombing has facilitated the move of the Syrian armed forces that basically block Turkey from moving south any farther. Turkey's done after Al-Bab. They may be able to move laterally into Tel Rifat or Manbij, but they can't go south. And so you have Russian embedded special operations forces with the Syrian forces and Russian air power given to this offensive, and now they've blocked Turkey. At the same time, you have a sustained and iterative Russian outreach to the PYD to try and broker reconciliation talks with the regime. It's based upon a very logical understanding that the regime will never be able to retake Kurdish territory. They may be able to play divide and conquer out in Deir ez-Zor or out in the eastern Syrian desert, but core Kurdish constituencies, I think for all intents and purposes, are lost to the Syrian central government. And so I think you would find an amenable Russia to decentralizing the Syrian state. They've already hinted that they would do that anyways. And so I think it will be up to them to broker a rapprochement between the regime and the Kurds so that you don't have sort of internal squabbles that threaten Syrian stability. Now, this is extremely difficult to carry out, but again, leads me back to Turkey. So what are you going to do if the Russians and the Americans sign up to decentralizing the Syrian state? If your answer is invade Rojava, northern Syria, how long do you plan to stay and how many troops can you actually commit to it and how many billions of dollars do you have lying around to spend? And so do you have a political solution to solve the Kurdish issue? Because that's where this hinges. And so I get back to my original policy proposal. I think the U.S. has to step in as part of its Syria strategy to solve this, at least the best to our ability.
But I mean, what you recommend in your report and what you have explained so far, it requires a heavy U.S. involvement in both Syria and also to Turkey in different levels. But we have heard that throughout his presidential campaign, Trump saying that he doesn't want his administration to be too involved in Syria, like even in Middle East. So do you think the new administration will be, or is it willing to be that involved in what's going on in Syria and its neighboring countries and Turkey?
That's a very good question. The policy proposals I laid out are bold and obviously a very heavy lift for U.S. diplomacy. It's entirely unclear what this administration wants to do. We are, I think, 28 or 29 days in, and we only just yesterday have our second national security advisor. We have a White House that, by all accounts, is in, let's say, disarray and is still trying to figure out how to govern. And Syria is a very steep slope to learn. And so we are going to find out what their tolerance is for trying to broker political solutions. All evidence suggests that it's not very much. But, after Raqqa falls within the next year or so, we will still be left with this heaping mess of a civil conflict. We can turn around and leave, and that's probably, that's probably going to be the instinct. But again, you will leave a very long, tenuous, vulnerable front line between Turkey and the PKK, which will cause problems for U.S. foreign policy. You can imagine 3 to 4 years out. So again, the policy proposals are trying to get out in front of what I expect to be a long-term problem.
And I have a follow-up question for this. Today, Reuters had a news and said that CIA stopped giving support to the rebel forces in Syria. Can we see this as an indication for less U.S. involvement in Syria? Do you think we can read this like that?
I think you can read it actually as a curtailing of Turkish objectives in Idlib more than the CIA, because they work together. It's that,
I think we're having a problem with our connection. So we were talking with Mr. Stein, who is a resident senior fellow at Atlantic Council, about his latest report published on Council on Foreign Relations about how the reconciliation of US and Turkey interests in Northern Syria is possible. And Mr. Stein, in his paper and during our interview, has explained that like the only way to reconcile the interests of these two countries is to restart the peace negotiations between PKK and Turkey. Okay, so I think the connection problem that we're having is not, we can't solve it, so we have to stop here. Yeah, so like we talked with Mr. Stein about his possible scenarios on US's Syrian policy and how the conflicting interests of Turkey and US in Syria can be reconciled. Thank you for having watched us.